everybody. Welcome back to the How to Podcast series. I'm so excited to have my guest on. We connected through Podmatch, which I love. And Jeff's here, and he's going to talk today a little bit about what he does over at Stampede.Social. You got to go check it out. Amazing website. I'm like watching everything move on my screen. It's beautiful. You got to go there and just take a look. It's really great. Jeff's going to talk about that, and we're going to talk podcasting. And we both know what Niagara Falls is, which is nice. We have that in common. And Jeff's here to talk podcasting. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
This is exciting. Jeff, awesome. So Podmatch, thank you for connecting, and thank you for allowing this to happen, Podmatch. This is amazing. I love the service. So I like to brag about them because they're great people. So Alex and team, thank you. Right?
Alex is great. Alex is wonderful. And Podmatch is super. And I was just emailing with Alex earlier today. So yeah, he's a great guy. Great person.
Yeah. Super nice, super kind. Jeff, tell us a little about your podcast journey. How did all this start for you?
My podcast journey. Well, let me start. It's kind of weird because it originally started as I was really big on Twitter and social media. Stampede.Social is, as you mentioned, it's focused on Instagram and Facebook, but way back in 2020 or before that, 2017, really, I was really, really into Twitter. I was originally OG verified. I was writing for the Huffington Post, and I had tweets that would go viral and end up in every magazine you could possibly think of. Okay. Cause that's where a lot of the content came from, was Twitter. It's anytime people were looking for, anyway. So I was really big into that. So I was going to start a podcast, and it was going to be called Viral Intentions. And I was going to talk about social media. And that was my idea. I got a soundboard. I went to Fiverr. I got the intro, the outro. I had the artwork, everything. I was ready to go, and I'm sitting, but I just never did it. And I had I have a Rodecaster now, but back then I had hey, you can start podcasting with this $30 soundboard also, but the problem with that soundboard is you need someone who knows how to use the soundboard. So I had a friend come over and set it up, and then the family wasn't allowed anywhere near it, because if you bumped it, I was done podcasting. And so, but then I never did it. And so I had this great idea. I loved the name Viral Intentions because it was like Cruel Intentions, the movie, but plus going viral and all that kind of stuff, and just sat on it. And then in 2020, I finally had time. So I started to put it all together again. And I realized, 2020, just to match it up in time, that's the pandemic. So the pandemic's happening. We all have time because we're all at home now. And I get everything going, and I'm like, I can't start a podcast called Viral Intentions. So I was like, oh God. So I had to throw everything away. And I started the Jeff Dwoskin show because, we could debate. I feel now was a bad idea. But and somebody had introduced me to a couple famous people, or, famous in my world, B or C celebrity type famous, but that's the kind I love. You can see in my backdrop, I love going to Comic-Cons. That's always been my thing, and getting photos and autographs with the celebrities at Comic-Cons. And so a couple of them started talking to me, and I'm like, oh my God, this can be a thing. They'll talk to me. and so, I'm about to in May, I'll hit 5 years, episode 3, over 360 episodes. And yeah, it just, so it ended up shifting. I ended up changing it. And then it went from the Jeff Dwoskin show, live from Detroit, the Jeff Dwoskin show. And then it was kind of people were like, well, is it a live show? No. Is it only about Detroit? No. Yeah. Who's Jeff Dwoskin? Okay, I'm going to change the name of my podcast. And so I changed it to, I literally sat down and just started writing out, all right, what is my podcast about? Because it was funny, I'd been doing it for a couple of years, but I was so I started doing just, writing down words, like a mind map, and I write classic, and then classic conversation. Okay, that's what I'm doing. That's actually what I'm doing. I've been doing it. So I'm going to rename it to what it actually has been the whole time and make it a little clearer. So nice. That was my journey. That was a little long. Sorry.
I like it. Yesterday or something showed up on my feed, little clips of Bill Murray on Joe Rogan's podcast. And Bill has no idea who Joe Rogan is, first of all. He's like, he met him in the hallway and he's like, are you Joe? Like, Bill has no idea what a podcast is. He's like, is this live? Like, he's looking around the room. He would get up and walk off mic and go talk about something on the other side of the room. And Joe's like, Bill, no one can hear you. Oh, like, it was this cool moment of like somebody who's really big in the space kind of having somebody who has zero idea what a podcast is as a guest. It was this cool little moment of kind of, let's reset the room, everybody, because there's people still today that have no idea what a podcast is. And it was so cool to watch Bill kind of navigate the podcast space in real time and have zero idea what's happening. It was so cool and refreshing to see that. So when I hear people talk about their journey in podcasting, to see the growth that happens as we kind of fumble our way through this in the beginning and find our feet, find our voice, I love that kind of journey. And I love when people can follow that journey as well.
I had that happen to me one time. It was a phoner, so I can't see the person. Yeah. And not my favorite thing, because even if like at some point if somebody would be like, I don't want you to use a video, I'm like, well, let's still do it over Zoom because it's easier to talk to you if we can see each other. You know, that's just and all of a sudden it's like I can barely hear him. I'm like, did you walk away from your phone? He thinks like he just walks into the kitchen and is just talking normal. I'm like, yeah, I need you to stay near the phone.
I was interviewed on a podcast. A comedian had me on to talk about podcasting, and he was recording in a coffee shop on his end. So I'm here all set up, ready to go. I can't see him because it's just a black screen. There's no video at all. And partway through our conversation, he's like, Dave, I got to go to the bathroom, but I'm just going to leave my phone here on the table and I'm going to go. I'll be back. And he walked away, left me as the guest on the show on the table in the cafe. I can hear people talking around me. And he left me on the show for myself. So I'm like, well, I'm going to take over. So I just took over the show and I started talking to the audience because that's what we do. And it was the weirdest moment. I've never been left alone as a guest on someone else's show. It was the weirdest thing. He came back. I'm like, I sure hope you washed your hands. Okay, let's get back into the conversation. It was so bizarre. I've never, ever since had that happen to me. That was really weird.
That's really funny. I love that.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your Stampede.Social. Again, I have the website up. It's flashing at me. It's dancing all over my screen. I love the website. What is Stampede.Social? What do you do? Who do you help? Can you talk a little bit about that before we get into our podcast conversation?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I appreciate it. Stampede.Social is for creators, podcasters. It is meant to help you drive listens from your social media, Instagram and Facebook, and also to drive engagement from your podcast and make it trackable using Instagram. So meaning like from Instagram, it has DM automation. You can run post level giveaways. You can use AI tools to analyze your posts and do all these things that you need to do. So as a creator myself, we, built this and created this whole suite of tools to help podcasters and other creators to really kind of maximize and drive listens. But it also works for a podcaster. Like you could be like, hey, go DM me on Facebook or Instagram, BetterHelp, whatever. And like, instead of like getting them to remember your custom URL or something like that, and then they engage with you on social. So now you're converting live listeners to known engagement people. You know who's listening because now they're in your DMs. And then you can track your progress. You can do that for your Patreon, for your mailing list, get them to sign up for your YouTube channel, anything like that. So it kind of can work multi-channel in both ways. So you can leverage the power of your podcast and of your social and or both.
So one of the things I'm hearing, Jeff, in the podcast space, which makes me concerned and a little confused, is there's some people in the space who are exiting social media and doing a newsletter, for example. They totally abandon Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. They just like, no, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not seeing the results. I'm going to leave social media completely. Like they're just walking away. And I'm like, that seems a little harsh. That seems a little extreme. Like, is there a balance, you think, for podcasters where we can still be active on social and embrace some of the other tools that people are enamored with right now? Like, where do you sit on this? Because I like to get some kind of just somebody to kind of give us a better overview of the social media platforms and how they integrate with our podcast.
So this is how I look at it. If you should be on all the platforms, you just should be. Why? Because people are on all the platforms and you should be there. I get sometimes there's some political reasons where people are like, I'm leaving this one or I'm leaving that one. I was like, so leave it, but leave it up. I mean, let people find your URL and click from there to somewhere else. If you don't like Twitter, X, whatever, then just don't post on Twitter anymore. Put up a final thing. And then when people find you on Twitter, they can click to your URL and go to your website or do whatever you want. But don't shut off your Twitter. I mean, just don't use it. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like the same thing with like Facebook or anything like that. I mean, if people are looking for you and you want them to find you, you have to be findable. Right. So now there's the idea that, okay, at least be findable. And if you don't want to be active on Facebook, because I can understand the argument. There's only so much you can make custom content for each and every platform. And that's a fair argument. But that doesn't mean like if you're not going to be active on your Facebook page that you can't put something, a promo video and, hey, if you want to sign up, here's the link to Apple, here's the link to Spotify, here's my webpage, sign up for my mailing list. So at least if they find you and they're interested in your podcast, they can get to it. If they can't even find you, then you lost, right? And they'll find somebody similar or they'll just, not do anything. So, there's some tricks, right? I mean, if you create a vertical video, that vertical video can be on YouTube Shorts. It can go onto TikTok. It can go onto Instagram Reels. So that's easy, right? I mean, that's one thing, and you can use it in multiple places. I throw it on Blue Sky now too, so I'll say I have a ton of followers on Blue Sky and get no engagement on Blue Sky at all. But here's the thing. It's like, I don't know, Blue Sky also doesn't give you the kind of stat. So I don't know if people are seeing it or not. So, I just put it up there. It doesn't take me any extra time to do it every now and then. So I just do it. My focus is mostly on Instagram and YouTube Shorts, and sometimes I'll throw it up on TikTok. And I get the most engagement, I think, right now on YouTube Shorts, to be honest. It's
really,
yeah, I don't know. Sometimes like a TikTok will catch fire, but it's much rarer. And, you got to have a website. You got to, everyone's like, SEO is dying. All right, really? My email that just came in quadrupled my SEO from the week before. So even if it could have been quadruple that in a different lifetime, it's still a huge number that people are finding me. So I'm not going to give up on Google. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, if you want people to find you, you got to be everywhere. Just like you wouldn't just be on Apple, right? I mean, you wouldn't, right? You're everywhere, right? Your podcast is anywhere they pick up a podcast app, that's where you're going to be. It's the same philosophy. It's the same concept. You need to be where people are looking, and you don't know where they're looking. So you might as well be there one way or another.
Right.
So when they find you, they can connect,
And then back to, Bill Murray being on Joe's podcast. Bill's asking him, like, what is a podcast? Like, can you explain to me what's happening here? Because I have no idea. I don't listen to them. I don't know what they are. I don't know what we're doing here. Like, is there people listening to us right now? Is this live? Like, he has so many questions for you, Jeff. If somebody walked up to you at the cafe or the store and said, Jeff, I know you work with podcasting and social media, but what the heck is a podcast? Do you think the name of podcasting, you think the definition's changing at all lately?
I think that, with the Joe Rogan thing, right? That's the typical argument is Joe Rogan's actually a podcast because it's actually just a video. It's only on a couple of platforms, I think, So, old school podcast is just anybody creating a show and putting it out there, right? Mm-hmm. So that to me, I held on to the old school, it's audio only and you can do whatever. But, you can't ignore video. Right. I was watching, I thought it was relevant to this part of this conversation. I was watching this documentary on Yacht Rock. Okay. Yacht Rock. Yes. It was a recent documentary. Okay.
Yeah.
So I love Yacht Rock too. And so there was a a part of that documentary where they were talking about how when MTV came around, that a lot of people were resistant to MTV because it was video and they were used to just creating albums and being on the radio. And those that adapted to MTV became extremely successful. And those that didn't, a lot of them faded away. And I'm watching this, I'm like, oh, this is exactly what's happening right now with the conversation around video, podcasting and YouTube. It's like there's such a resistance to put your face out there, but this is where it's going, whether you like it or not. So I started actually editing and putting a version of the podcast on video. I say version because it's a different editing that I do, because it's just the way I, the time I have, and just it's more of a cleanup than it is a full edit, like with the audio. But I mean, some people like it, and then then it's like weird because like some of my biggest YouTube videos are just the ones that are audio with just just an image. Yeah. You know what I mean? So because a lot of people do digest YouTube that way as well. They don't actually watch. They just like to listen to it via YouTube because that's where they discover it. Yeah. So, should you be on YouTube even if you don't have time for the video? Yeah, I did that for years where I just pushed it to YouTube and got tons of listens that way.
It's funny because I listen to podcasts a lot at work, where I work at night, and I'll hear people at the end say, find us wherever you find your podcast, or listen wherever you listen to, or watch, or they'll do all these different things at the end of the show. And then you go look and they're not on Apple, for example, or they're not on Spotify, or they're not on YouTube. So when you open the gate to everybody and just kind of blanket statement, find me wherever you find podcasts, then you should be found wherever people find podcasts. That makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know why would that person say that if they're not on Apple and Spotify? I mean, like those are the first two places anyone would look. And if you're going to send somewhere, I think Apple, did I read somewhere that there's a version of Apple that you can now play on Android, or that's part of the plan? Because that's always been the problem, right? If you tell people go to Apple, or you're obsessed with your Apple, half the world is Android, or
whatever,
made up stuff, but you know what I mean? Yeah. So Spotify is a safe one to send people to, right? Because Spotify works on all platforms, or I'm sure there's other ones that work on both platforms too, but mainstream, Spotify works, Amazon, probably music, those kind of things are across the different types of phones. So unless I have it on my website too, so people can just play it through my player, you know what I mean? So, but that goes back to just having to be everywhere. You got to be found.
I don't want to get into a shouting match with consumers on what the definition of a podcast is. I don't think that gives value to anybody. So if somebody reaches out to me and says, hey, I heard Jeff's podcast on YouTube, should I say, well, that's not a podcast, that's a YouTube channel. To them, it's a podcast. And do I care where they found me? As long as they find me and it works for them on their end, it's kind of like a facial tissue is a Kleenex. Well, Kleenex is not the brand for all brands, every company in the world that makes facial tissue, but people call facial tissue Kleenex because it just becomes synonymous with the name. So when I go to YouTube and there's no audio podcast, but there's only a YouTube one, and it's two guys with microphones, is that a podcast? To the consumer, yes. Or should we be okay with that? Well, the consumer says that's what it is. Then I don't want to get into a fighting match saying, well, technically, that's not, but to them it is. So can't we be happy with somebody finding our show however they find it and be happy with that? I think that's something to consider at least.
Yeah. I mean, it's as long as people listen, I don't care what they call my show, but but the definition has changed. I mean, we can't, to sit in like the people that argue that if his video is not, it's like, it's almost getting to the point where it's almost, the definition is it regulated or not? Mm-hmm. And, and we're not, you're right. So one day we could be, right? That could change. Everything else in the world is flip flopping. So that's really the definition. So if just two people doing a web show where it's just them doing it and saying whatever they want to say, I mean, it's all in the same genre, right? I mean, it's like saying it's not a TV show if it's a comedy or it's a drama or dramedy. They're all TV shows, right? I mean, just there's subversions of the different types of media that is on your TV. So
yeah, okay, I like it. So when you look in the podcast space, Jeff, what are you excited about that you feel is coming down the road for podcasting? What if you could put on your Back to the Future goggles and look into the future of podcasting? Anything that you would love to see or you're hoping to see in podcasting?
I love that. I love the companies that are making it easier for us. You know what I mean? Like my savior right now, what I love more than anything is podcast.adobe.com.
I know.
And the audio cleanup that they have. That's like amazing. Like it really is. Like I've had episodes that it's saved because it just, my guest was their audio was whatever. And I was able to kind of fix it. So it's all about, I just discovered Final Cut Pro on my iPad. I use it on the Mac, but on the iPad, I'm like, now I can sit on the couch, it's like even better in some ways than the one for my Mac. So it's like, I think the tools, it's like for the people who are truly dedicated to it, that's what we really need. Right. I mean, it's like, cause you have like people that just start podcasting, right? The pod fade, whatever, it's you start to realize how difficult it is to really, you do a million shows. So, you have to, it has to be easy enough the process has to be clean enough to be able to get through and do all those things so that you can put out multiple quality products. So, the more we're handed tools that make that easier, you still have to put the time in, but makes it easier. That keeps me going, to be honest.
My latest podcast I just created is called Canadian Podcaster at CanadianPodcaster.com. I'm in Canada, and I have like an online magazine that I've created for podcasters to kind of raise the voices and the attention of Canadian podcasters from across my country. I had the idea for the show. I went and checked for the domain. It was available. I got to CanadianPodcaster.com. And within an hour, my show, I had the trailer, episode 1. I was already hosted. I was already distributed. And I had a listener in India, 2 different states in the U.S., and 2 provinces in Canada within an hour of the idea. So, yeah, the tools are there. You can get out and do it fast. And it's probably the easiest it's ever been. I give a nod back to the people back in the early 2000s when it wasn't easy to do any of this. For you and I to do even just this right now was impossible. And you had to be a tech genius to create a podcast. So I kind of find that because it's becoming so easy, we're neglecting to acknowledge the people who created the industry for us, who were there struggling in the trenches, making this happen. Because every improvement was based on somebody with an idea, right? So I always like to bring people back and go, listen, there was a day when none of this was easy, just so you know. But today it is a lot easier. So you're right. The tools are great.
Now, that is part of the problem, too. It's easier, but that doesn't mean it takes no time. Right. And I think that's where people dive in. They realize, holy crap, because like you have to prepare for a show. Then you're recording the show. Yeah. And then you have to edit the show. And then you have to then distribute the show and promote the show. There's a lot of time that goes into that. It's not just, some people, I guess you could get away with if you just do it live and dump it and move on and don't care about stuff like, fixing sound or something like that. And, sometimes I always say like my podcast, the one you listen to is the best I could do at that time. Right. And I always joke, if you listen to my podcast backwards, it's like, oh, why is it getting worse? Right. Because that's the way it should be. Right. Yeah. You get better as you go and you learn new things as you go. But, it still takes time. It still takes a lot of time to do it. And so, I find ways to try and maximize and make that more efficient. But when people just trying to jump in and then like, Oh, I had to prepare. Oh, I had to, so.
Yeah, I had a new podcaster working on a brand new show come and talk to me last week. And they're so excited. They're like, I got these great ideas. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm like, how much free time do you have in your week? Like unaccounted for free time where you just can blow off and do nothing. And they're like, I'm pretty busy. I got small kids. I got my job. I got my life and all these things. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you going to give up to create space to do this new project of this podcast? Because if you don't create space for it, it's not going to happen. So what are you giving up? Do you watch a lot of TV? They're like, yeah, a lot. I'm like, well, maybe you can cut back on some TV time, but you're going to have to give up something. Like there's no new hours added to your week because you have an idea. You're going to have to rob something from somewhere, and hopefully not your children and your kids and your family and your job. You're going to have to find something somewhere else. So my caution to anybody thinking about starting a show is, how much free time do you have? You need to you have to understand your limitations before you take on something new in addition to everything else you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. So,
Right.
I used to do things a certain way, and then I'm like, you start to save time. You start to change the process. Like I would do a whole episode, and I would listen to the whole episode, and someone's like, "Why are you doing that?" If something's drastically wrong, someone will tell you. You just re-upload it. I'm like, okay, you're right. So what possibly could go wrong that anyone's gonna really notice? That's the thing that drives me crazy. Is like I spend a lot of time. I try and get out the, all the, and I try and clean it up as much as I can. And then you listen to other people's. I listen to some podcasts. Like I'll listen to podcasts if I'm interviewing someone, if they've been on another podcast, right? And because I like to, part of the prep I think is, are they talkers? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that gives me an idea, and what to expect. And sometimes I like to avoid certain things that maybe were overused, from that person, whatever. Just trying to keep it. Come at it at a fresh angle and stuff like that. But I'll listen to these things and it's like, oh my God, I got to put the volume all the way up. I can barely hear the host.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's like the sound is just, it's horrible, like really horrible. Or like the host clearly didn't prepare or like all these things that I do, but probably half the people listen to that episode go, oh, that was great.
Yeah.
I'm like, it drives me crazy. I just like, why? I was listening to one episode once of somebody's podcast and the host wasn't in there. Like it would be like just me answering a question then so I emailed and I said, hey, tell your friend, he uploaded the wrong file. He's like, oh, no, there's something wrong with my audio. So you uploaded a podcast without you as the host asking the questions? It's just dead air and then the answer, dead air, answer. I'm like, at least re-record it. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need the other person. You know what the answer is. Just add in the question. I'm like, and here I am, like, worried about
yeah, I know, right?
Like, you didn't even put in your entire you. Oh, man.
All right. Well, that happened to me. I was on one of the popular, I won't name them, a popular online recording platform to do an interview. And something happened like during the middle of it and things started going weird on my screen. And I'm like, oh, I'll just keep going. Because it looked like everything was going from my guest side. I'm like, that's fine. And then I get this back and they completely lost me altogether as the host. My track was gone. But I got my guest. So in the moment, I'm like, what am I going to do? So because it was fresh, I said goodbye to my guest, got their version of my podcast, their answers to my questions, threw it into my DAW, and I started recording myself, asking the questions back to them so that I could capture the moment because it's fresh, it's in my mind. And I had to basically be an actor on my own show, laughing, engaging, being Dave by myself to my guests that's pre-recorded. It was the weirdest thing ever, but that was the one way that I saved my episode. And I reached out to them and they're like, we don't know what happened, sorry. I'm like, well, what am I paying for here? So yeah, it's pretty interesting. You got to be creative as a podcaster. Don't put out half an interview. Come on, right? That's amazing. Okay, for let's talk a little bit more about Instagram, for example. That's one of my choice platforms. I agree with you about being everywhere. A lot of us are a team of one, and we can't be active everywhere, like 100% all the time. But at least be there and get your name and secure your identity on these platforms, grab your handle, all that stuff. That's great. I've said to many people, Jeff, if you want to win at horse racing, which I don't encourage everyone to go out and bet on horses, but if you want to win on your next horse race, put money on every horse. You're guaranteed that one of those horses are going to cross the line. You're going to spend a lot of money, but you're going to learn something in the process, and you're guaranteed to win. So if you're going to, as a podcaster and social media, if you pick just one horse, just one platform, put all of your attention on it, it may not be where your audience lives. And you're going to waste a lot of money and time on a horse that's never going to cross the line. But if you put your time and effort onto all of them and then measure the results, then you're going to find where your audience seems to live more. And that's where you should focus in on and have conversations. Ask your audience, hey, where did you find me? Oh, I found you on my Instagram. And if nobody says Facebook and you spend 10 hours a week on Facebook, you're not going to get any return on that. So I like betting on all the horses and then measure the results. It's kind of my way. And then keep the handles on all my different platforms. So again, to the podcast analogy, find me wherever you find podcasts. Find me on social, wherever you are on social. You should at least have some kind of presence and then lead people back to where you want to gather as much. So for an Instagram perspective on podcasting, any tips as a podcaster to engage with our audience when we get a new follower on Instagram? How do we encourage that community aspect on Instagram for podcasters?
That's a great question. I think the thing that people don't do enough of is lead the witness. So if you just post your episode, you're not really asking for engagement, right? So ask a question, pin that question, when always respond to anyone who engages with you one way or another. And that's, you have to foster what you want. And so if it's engagement or conversation, you have to ask the questions. You can't be passive about it because people are going fast. So if you want them to do something, you have to ask, flat out ask. And don't ask 4 paragraphs down. You have to ask at the top. I think what a lot of people, they write out these long things, these long captions, thinking everyone's going to read it. And no one's going to read it. They're going to read the first thing maybe. And so if you want them to do something, put that ask at the top, and then you can talk about your guest or whatever underneath that. Hey, what's your favorite, podcast, blah, 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 blah. Today I'm talking to Bill Morrison and we're discussing this and this and this, put that secondary. So it all depends on your goals. But I mean, that's, I think what most people I see could improve on is just asking for what you want and not assuming they'll do it just because you exist.
And the whole idea about putting social back in social media, again, don't post episode 5, it's live, and then you leave the platform. But stick around. And then I love voice messages as DMs because it's something it's not, you can't automate that. A way you could automate having an assistant or something else, a tool to do it for you. A voice message is, hey, Jeff, thanks for the follow. I'm glad to have you here. Thanks for your interest in the show. I'd love to talk to you sometime and get to know you and know what you're doing. But this is Dave. Thanks. Just really appreciate it. Like, that is a clickable button that people can't ignore. They're like, this person left me a voice message. I want to know if this is a real human, first of all. So I'm going to press and, oh, there's Dave. That's the guy from the show. Like, that's the real guy. That's not some assistant. That's him. And he's talking to me. I love leaving a DM like that. I just find it to be a little more engaging, especially if they respond. It's like, oh, well, now we're talking to each other. And I really love that. It's just a different thing than a quick, easy text message back. I just think it's a little different. It stands out. And I've actually had some great responses from leaving those kinds of DMs.
That's great. That's awesome. Yeah. If you find something that works for you, keep at it. It's like whatever your thing is. I don't I don't love when I get DMs or not DMs, voice messages because I'm never at a place where I can listen to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know what it said, so I don't want to just blast it. So
Yeah.
but that's just me. But
There you go.
I love the idea.
It's interesting. And the other part, I guess, what I would say too, as we kind of think about wrapping up here, Jeff, is just the idea that for people who build their whole world on a specific platform, just remember that you don't own the keys to the platform. So you spend all this time, for example, Instagram changed the dimensions of the images on your page. So all your pictures now, all that artwork where the picture would blend over multiple squares, it's all gone. It's all weird. It's all different because you know what? Instagram can do whatever they want. They can take your features away. They can add new things. They can show your stuff to people. They can not show your stuff to people. They own it. You're just a customer that's not paying for the service. So just keep that in mind. Facebook has gone down a couple times in the past. There's no Facebook. Like, sorry, you can't log in. There's nothing to see here. And if you build your world only on one specific platform, just be careful that, again, you don't own that. So you mentioned earlier about having a website. Very good idea for people to come and be in touch with you, because then you own that domain, you own that piece of real estate on the internet. That's a great tip. I love and encourage people to have that domain. Point it at whatever you have for now, but at least own something from the internet where people can find you if something else goes down. So just keep that in mind. And then you talked about Twitter, and there's a big exodus from Twitter, and people have gone to other things like Blue Sky. But people have built their whole world on a platform and then not know what to do with it when the platform changes or it's not the way it was in the past. So my encouragement is to build community wherever you are, but have a central hub doesn't require a login to get to. That's kind of my thing. I'm building a community on meetup.com for podcasters. So we can do this kind of virtually over the internet. We can have conversations in person. So I like it because it's kind of like back to COVID days and all the online Zoom meetings, but there's still people looking for interaction with people. And this is a different level for me in addition to my social media because it gives me more personal time on one-on-one and people get to meet each other. So there's three things that I focus on, Jeff. I want my audience to self-identify and say, I listen to your show. I put their hand up, send you an email, send you a DM, whatever, a message, speak pipe message, whatever it is. I listen to Jeff's show. Great. Self-identified. The next one is I want to have a conversation with the host. So when Jeff reaches out to me through the voice messages you don't enjoy, but has a conversation with me now as a listener, I've gone beyond being a passive listener to an active listener. I've spoke to the host. They've made time for me, however best they can do that. So that's the second step. And then the third step is, how can I talk to the other people who listen to Jeff's show? My neighbor next to me might listen to your show too. I have no idea. Unless I go ask him, do you listen to Jeff's podcast? Yeah.
I'm sure the answer is yes.
Of course it is. That's what I'm anticipating. But I would love to meet fellow listeners because we have something in common. We all love Jeff's show. So I want to build on those three.
My dream, right? My dream, David, is like for one day, I'm just in a restaurant going, yeah, I'll have the lasagna and a side salad. And someone goes, wait a minute, are you Jeff Dwoskin?
Unless they don't like your show, and they work in the kitchen, then you don't want them to know.
Right. Well, just like, they recognize my voice and like go, I listen to your podcast. Like, that's my dream. Well, if that happens, I'm done. That's I'm good.
I spoke at a school for grade 6 girls in Vancouver, British Columbia. And they brought me in as a guest to talk about podcasting in this tech class for grade 6 girls. There was 22 of them, and I was there for an hour. And one of the girls yelled out, my dad listens to the How to Podcast series in the car on the way to work. I'm like, what? I'm like, okay, all right. I'm like, to the teacher, give that student a bonus mark or something. That was great. So it's kind of cool when people actually put their hand up and go, I listen to Jeff's show. It's kind of this amazing thing.
So my neighbor comes over. It's Halloween. And he says, Jeff, I was driving to Chicago and the podcast I listened to ended. And it says, hey, Jeff Dwoskin recommends. But then I realized this isn't Jeff Dwoskin recommends. This is Jeff Dwoskin's podcast. So I start listening to your podcast. And like, I'm just going episode after episode after episode. And I call my wife. I'm like, Jeff's got a podcast. It's really good. And like, anyway, so he goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on. But here's the best part of the story. The best part of the story is at the end, he leaves. And my wife turns to me and she goes, you know what? I think the Ring camera caught that whole thing.
Nice.
I'm like, that's awesome. Downloaded it from Ring.
So you have a copy of that. There you go.
Yeah, so
Nice.
the one time that's happened. So, yeah.
So Jeff, a new
It's
person
the
coming to
little
your
things,
show
so.
for to listen for the first time. I'm coming through the door. I'm going to press play on an episode. Do you have a starting point for a listener? Where would you encourage them to start? Most recent, the oldest, anything in particular as a starting point for your show?
So here's the thing with my podcast. It's it's a pop culture podcast. I talk to people who, when they were famous, they were really famous. But that could have been in the 60s, the 70s, stuff like that. So when people say, who's the most famous person on your show? I realized early on, I can answer who I think, but that doesn't mean that's who they think, right? So at some point, you get 300 plus episodes going. It's kind of like, look at the list. Are you a Lost in Space fan? Do you like Batman, the original Batman? Talk to Burt Ward. Happy Days fan, a Love Boat fan. So there's like kind of a cherry pick thing that goes on where they'll listen to. My always hope is that they'll listen to the episodes and realize, oh, Jeff has good conversations with these people. And so I'm going to try this one who I don't know. And so because sometimes those can be even more interesting because sometimes they're the people behind the people, type of thing. So real kind of deep stories on the stuff we love growing up. So I realized early on, it's like, I don't know where you want to start. You know what I mean? It's like, it's one of those things where different guests that I have resonate differently with different people.
Well, I have some people I'd love to send your way that I've had on my show, Jeff, that you might not have had yet. I've got some really interesting people from Hollywood, people that would really fit with your show. We'll chat about that when we're done here. But
yeah, I love that. I love that. Amazing. Thank you.
Awesome. Again, shout out your podcast. Yeah, again, Jeff, please.
Classic Conversations with Jeff Dwoskin. You can type in Classic Conversations, but then sometimes Classical Conversations comes up. It's hugely annoying because they're completely different words.
Right.
But so if you type in Classic Conversations and then Jeff Dwoskin, it'll come up. JeffIsFunny.com is the name of the website. So that's a little easier to remember. And then from there, you can jump to everywhere podcasts you listen to. I have links to a bunch. So.
Okay. We'll put all the links in for everybody. I'm asking everyone to go to Jeff's Instagram and leave him a voice message. No, don't do that. But yeah, do that for Jeff. I'm sure. And go listen to his show, everybody. Give him some support. And go find your favorite character from the past that you would love to hear the stories. What an interesting idea for a show, Jeff. That must be really fun to have these people on your camera, on your screen, and be like, oh my gosh, you're the person from the thing. Oh my gosh. That's got to be a lot of fun for you.
Yeah, sometimes it's, I try not to fanboy or anything like that, but but yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Amazing. Jeff, thank you so much for doing this. Again, Podmatch, thank you for making the connection for us. Really appreciate that. And everyone go support Jeff. And also go over to check out Stampede.Social as well. I know Jeff would love to have a conversation with you if he can help you and be of service. He's got blogs. He's got all kinds of stuff there as well. Reach out to him. I'm sure he'd love to chat with you about your social media needs and everything that you need. Please reach out to Jeff. Jeff, thank you again so much for the conversation. It's great to meet you and great to have time with you.
It's so great to meet you. I loved it. Thank you. Great to hang.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast all the way through to the end. I love having these great guest co-hosts on the show to share their podcast with you. You have some homework to do. And what I'm asking of you is to go check out our featured guest co-host today. Go over and listen to their podcast. The links are always in the show notes. And I'd love for you to go and give them your love and support. And I think if we can all do that for each other, podcasting will be a lot more fun for all of us. So it's time to do what you've asked others to do for you. It's time to do for this guest co-host. Links in the show notes. Go over and check out their show and leave them a review, do the follow, go listen to their episodes in full, the entirety of an episode, which again shows to the apps that it's a good podcast because you're going there and you're staying to the end. Probably one of the best ways you can help a podcaster grow their audience and be shown to more people is by simply going and listening wherever you listen to the very end, like you're doing right now here. This is the perfect way to signal to wherever you're listening on, this is a podcast worth promoting. And all of the apps want you to stay on as long as possible. So go over and listen to our guest co-host episode and leave them some feedback. If they have a buy me a coffee, send them a coffee. If they have a speak pipe, send them a voice message. If they have an email, send them an email. If they're on Instagram, send them a direct message. Do something to support our guest co-hosts. They've given up their time to be here with you, to be here with me, and we can give that back to them with time and attention, our love, our support. Thank you for doing all that for me as well. Here on the How to Podcast series, we'll talk to you soon for our next episode.